Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. This is Sub LBC here doing another video update, and this one here is a little bit off the cuff and obviously not really in line with the subject matter that is normally on this channel, but I thought it would be a good time to contribute kind of back to the YouTube community that's been very helpful in me doing my maintenance on my car because obviously if you're going to be buying a used BMW like this, you absolutely have to, have some do-it-yourself knowledge to keep up with the maintenance. Otherwise, you're basically just going to bankrupt yourself trying to keep a car like this on the road, paying dealership rates for labor and obviously for OEM parts and whatnot. It's just completely out of this world, and that's for BMW, going up to Porsche and, more exotic manufacturers. I don't know how those guys can stand it. But in any case, first disclaimer is that under no circumstances should you ever buy a used BMW at all whatsoever, unless you are like a hobbyist and are mechanically inclined and are not afraid to dive in and do your own work. Unless, of course, you just don't care about money and just want to burn it, that's perfectly fine as well. But if you're just kind of buying a car that you want to use as something that you absolutely need to rely on day in, day out, do not ever buy a used BMW of any kind. I don't care what it is, what the price is. It's just absolutely not worth it. It's a very bad decision. If you are going to buy like a used car or something like that, then I highly recommend going with something like this. This is a Toyota 4Runner TRD Pro. This car will start, rain or shine. It just simply does not matter the conditions. Assuming you've got charge on your battery, it will start, you will go, and you will live. A car like this, though, on the other hand, you have to stay on top of it. You have to stay on top of the maintenance, and you have to know exactly what needs to be done and how to do it yourself, because if you don't, then you are going to end up losing thousands and thousands of dollars. And moreover, the work done may not even be up to a particular standard that, again, if you're ignorant about, you don't even know if it's really being done correctly. And, based on a lot of information that I've seen on YouTube, there are a lot of people out there that are doing a lot of jobs improperly. So in this video here, we're going to talk about doing a power steering reservoir replacement as well as a full system flush. And I want to go into that in a little more detail because this is really the part that I see done incorrectly time and time again. Now, again, disclaimer, I'm not a BMW certified mechanic or an expert mechanic in any way, shape, or form. But, about 90% of all the stuff that needs to be done in this car, I can do myself. So, take that with a grain of salt. And what I wanted to do is to go over the procedures that I'm going to be doing to fix this car up, and also talk about some of the things that I've seen on YouTube that are absolutely incorrect. So first things first, guys, the power steering reservoir is obviously a huge problematic part in most BMW cars. You can see here on the left, this is my old power steering reservoir, and it's leaking a little bit of oil out there, but you can see it's just covered in grime and shit, and it's just completely leaking and just a complete piece of crap. And that wouldn't be bad enough, but the other thing is that there's actually a screen filter inside of this that cannot be replaced individually. So if you do want to get new filtration put in for your power steering system, then you definitely need to get a new reservoir, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And with this procedure, this power steering reservoir swap as well as the fluid purge is incredibly important if you have a car like this one that has adaptive drive. So this here is a 2013 BMW X5 e70 3.5i xDrive, and it is kind of unique because it is a premium model. And although it is not quite the same as an M Sport, which some people would think is the top of the line for a non-M X5. The fact of the matter is that the Premium is actually a little bit more of a special model because it comes with absolutely every luxury feature by default. So you just get everything, comfort access, welcome lights, the high-end automatic high beams and heads-up display, the full technology package, cold weather package, just absolutely every feature. Even the soft touch or the soft closed doors are on this car. And one thing that even makes it more special is that it has the $3,800 adaptive drive package, which also includes, electronic dampening control, as well as active anti-roll stabilization and active steering. So if you do have a car that has this type of setup, it's incredibly important to do your power steering fluid changes correctly, because the power steering fluid and the hydraulic system behind it isn't just responsible for making your steering work, but it's also responsible for providing hydraulic support for the ARS and possibly some other systems as well. So one of the things that I've seen when it comes to doing the flush is that people will say, oh, just top off, or use an extractor like this one here. This is just the standard, Harbor Freight $8 fluid extractor, and just pull all of your fluid out of there and then replace it with the good fluid, and there you go, you flush your system. And it's like, no man, that's absolutely ridiculous. Number one is that you have not flushed the system, and number two, you have not dealt with the failing reservoir or the filter inside of it that has to be changed. So that's really, really bad. The next setup I see people do when it comes to flushing out the system is that they will remove the power steering reservoir completely, and then they'll go ahead and try to like stick an extraction tube like this down the return lines and send lines, and try to suck all the fluid from either direction, while at the same time disconnecting the fluid from the lowest point of the car, which is generally the front steering rack, and then turning the rack back and forth to pump fluid out of the steering rack system. And then after that, they will go ahead and top off the system, and then there you go, your flush is completed. And that is also incorrect. And not only is it incorrect, but it's incredibly messy and a pain in the ass and requires a lot of extra steps that just makes life a lot more difficult. So what I wanted to do is to talk about the actual correct procedure for doing a power steering fluid swap, to make sure that you get 100%, or at least as close to 100% as possible, new fluid into the system. And the best way to do this is by achieving a bypass. So before we dive into the whole bypass aspect, it is important to note that removing the coolant reservoir is pretty much almost a 100% mandatory thing if you want to get access to the power steering reservoir. I am sure that it is possible to remove the power steering reservoir without removing the coolant entirely from the system, but it's incredibly difficult to do, and you're really going to be much happier removing the coolant reservoir completely from the system. Now, at least in my car, and this may not be the same with all BMWs or possibly even all X5s, every single connector that goes to my coolant system and my power steering system uses this type of C-clamp deal here. It's actually the same kind of clamping mechanism that works for my charge pipe. If you look right there, you can see that clamp right there. Oh, I'm gonna get my finger in there. There we go. That clamp right there. That's the same kind of clamping mechanism that's used to secure the return line for the coolant, which is here. And then down there you can see the coolant feed line. So this is what feeds the fresh coolant into the system. And you can see that clamp there has been pulled into the open position, which I find it's easier to connect them first than close the clamps. Although I have seen some guys, they close the clamps up immediately and then just snap the system in with the clamps already closed. But sometimes, I don't know, it doesn't really quite clamp up well that way. So I find it better to actually attach these hoses with the clamps in the open position, and then once they're securely snugged to the bottom, then you go ahead and you just press on this and close up those clamps, and then you are good to go. And you can see right here where these clear tubes are running are my power steering lines. Now the thicker one is the one that feeds fresh power steering from the reservoir, fresh power steering fluid from the reservoir into the system, and the smaller line is the return. So once all the fluid is run through every part of the system, from the power steering to the ARS and wherever else it goes, including all the connecting lines in between, all of that fluid is going to eventually end up in this return line being fed back to the reservoir, where it then gets filtered before it gets sent back into the system again. You know what I'm saying? And that's more or less the same way that the coolant works, except the coolant, I don't believe, has any kind of filtration at all. That's really just a free-flowing system, just regurgitating endlessly as the car is running. Now, what's really great about doing the bypass method is that this is, again, the best way to get as much of the fluid out of the car as possible. Now, to do this properly, there are two types of tubes you're going to have to get. So the first one here, if you can see, I've already connected it to my power steering fluid. And again, it's really important to use the best fluids. This here is the CHF11S from Pentosin, and I believe this is the OEM fluid, and is the only fluid you should run for this particular job. And you are going to need to have 2 liters, one to top off your reservoir, and then one over here to flush out the system. And this tube here is a Everbuilt. This is a, what is it? Can you guys see that? Yeah, that's a 7/8 outer diameter and 5/8 inner diameter. And this is kind of a bulky tube. It's not like a thin rubber, flexi tube. You want it to have some rigidity to it so that it fits really well inside of your return line and send line. Now, I was looking for like something that I could just screw onto the top of this, like a garden hose adapter with a 5/8 inch barb. But unfortunately, the 3/4 inch garden hose is the biggest they have, and that does not screw on directly to this. So instead, I just kind of minimally fed the line in, and then just used a whole bunch of Gorilla Tape to secure it on there and to water seal it as good as possible. And you can see I've even added a couple more pieces here and over here to make sure that no matter what happens, that tube cannot slip out, because if that happens while I'm in the middle of the procedure, it would be an absolute disaster. Now, as far as connecting to the return line, which in this procedure will become your waistline, this one here is a 1/2 inch outer diameter and a 3/8 inch inner diameter. Now, the inner diameter doesn't really matter as much. It's really the offset. It's the difference between the outer and the inner that matters, because obviously the thicker the rubber is, the more rigid it is going to be. And these are perfectly good. So if you get these, 7/8 outer by 5/8 inner, and then this one down here, again, the 1/2 inner to 3/8, I'm sorry, 1/2 outer and 3/8 inner are perfect. You can see they made up perfectly with the send and return lines. But if you want to be extra careful, you can also apply some Gorilla Tape there just to make sure those cables don't slip out, when there's a sudden pressure change, because you never know what's going to happen. So, when I put down the phone here, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and, add some additional Gorilla Tape just to make sure that none of those, come out. Now, once you've got your bypass lines set up, the next thing you're going to have to do is to basically temporarily reattach your coolant tank to the car, okay? Now, to do all of this, you're going to actually have to get 2 extractor pumps, because you don't really want to use your extractor pumps for both gear and coolant. So I have 2 of them. They only cost $8. One of them I use to extract all the power steering fluid from this reservoir, and the other one I use to extract all the coolant from this reservoir. And then when I reconnect this reservoir to the bottom and then to this return line here at the top, I am going to put some coolant in there, but not a whole ton, just a little bit, to make sure the car will run without overheating, really. But I don't want to like max it out, because I'm going to have to remove all that fluid again, when I have to get the space that I need to reconnect the lines to the new power steering reservoir once I replace it. You know what I'm saying? But before we put that new reservoir in, we want to make sure that all of the power steering fluid in the system is brand new. You know what I'm saying? So all the lines, the power steering rack, the ARS, everything that leverages this fluid is going to be replaced with as much new fluid as possible. So the procedure basically goes like this. Once you've set everything up, the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to hang this thing upside down above where it's going to be feeding to, and make sure to cut your tubing here accordingly, and maybe even use a torch like I've done to heat it up so I can unbend it and kind of straighten it out, so that way once I turn it and hang it from up here, it doesn't want to rip itself out. The tubing doesn't want to fight you and then want to pull itself out, because that would be again a disaster. The last thing you want is any air getting into the feed line that's feeding fresh fluid into the system. So that's another reason why I'm going to be adding some more additional Gorilla Tape to this little part, so that way everything stays nice and secure when I start this procedure. And it's also incredibly important that you get clear tubing, because the clear tubing is going to alert you to when the power steering fluid runs out. So when you're using 2 liters of fluid, again, it's 1 liter of fluid to purge the system, 1 liter of fluid to refill your reservoir, and that's pretty much that. So when you start the system, you're going to jack up the front end of the car. You're going to start the car, and then you want to go ahead and hang this upside down, and then you're going to see the fluid, start to saturate this tube and go into the feed system. And then once you see that happen, in fact, you probably want to do that before you even start the car. That way, you're minimizing all the air that goes into the system. And another thing you might want to do very quickly too, if you can, is to get like a knife or anything where you can, once you turn this thing upside down, you can poke some holes in the bottom, so that way you have air coming in from the top. Otherwise, it's gonna, the power steering pump is going to put suction on this tube, and there's no air coming in to offset the fluid that's coming out. So you probably want to, put a couple holes in there, so that way the power steering fluid will flow 100% without any, undesirable vacuum on the system. You just want it to free flow as quickly and as easily into the system as possible. Now, once the engine starts running and you start racking the steering wheel back and forth, you are going to obviously need a jack, right here in the center. You can put it on jack stands if you want, but a jack should be sufficient. It just depends on what your safety tolerance is. But with the front wheels off the car, you can then start the car, it's running, and then you can start racking the steering back and forth while the car is running and while the power steering pump is also running. That way the power steering pump itself will be the driving force to get all of the crappy fluid out of the system, while at the same time, accepting brand new fluid from this little IV bag that we're going to be hanging from right here, just using Gorilla Tape. It works really good for all these things. So yeah, you keep doing that and keep doing that, and then eventually you're going to see this fluid run out. You'll see fluid come in, and that's it. And then at that moment, you want to go ahead and stop the car immediately, so that way you're not sucking any air into the system. And then at that point, you can go ahead and disconnect all of this stuff, and then you put the power steering reservoir back in, although you're gonna have to again remove your coolant reservoir again. So get your coolant dedicated coolant extractor pump set to remove all that coolant. Detach the coolant reservoir from the system. That will give you all the space that you need to securely reattach the sensors. You can see there's one sensor right there, and I've got, I think, another one hiding off here. I got it kind of tucked away. Now there, you can see it right there, and that's going to go into the power steering system. In fact, I've got a brand new sensor just for that I've already taken off. I just kind of detached it from the electrical connection, just to kind of keep it out of the way temporarily. But obviously you're going to want to put that brand new sensor into your brand new reservoir. Make sure all your electrical connections are good. Make sure the bottom send and receive are both securely connected before you engage those clamps. But if it's nice and good, go ahead and secure those clamps, and then you can go ahead and easily remount the power steering onto that nipple down, where is it, down there. And then you're gonna have two more points right here and right there. And then of course I've already removed those here. Those will go back on, and then once your power steering system is back in place, you can go ahead and do the final securing of your coolant system. In fact, you probably want to do all the bottom securing of all of your lines and sensors first before you start hard mounting, but it's not that big of a deal. With your power steering, you've only got these two screws here, and then for the coolant you just got these two. And just make sure that all the mounting points line up. There is a mounting point for the reservoir. I think it's down there somewhere in this direction. Yeah, there's like a little piece. If you look at it, right here, that little end, just make sure that goes exactly where it's supposed to go. I think there's like a bracket or an area that it slides down into, but it's really easy. You're not going to really miss it. And then once everything's in the right place, secure it down. You want to make sure that you run your coolant bleed procedure once you add more coolant to the system, and this is done by basically putting the car into the on position and then holding the gas pedal in for about 10 to 15 seconds. The electric water pump will kick in and start purging air from the system, and then once it's done with that, you want to top it off, take the car for a drive, and once you get the car up to temperature, you want to go ahead and check your power steering levels, top off if needed, although you probably won't have a bunch of fluid left over to top off anyways, but 2 liters should be enough to do the job. And then carefully, if you want to, once the car's at temperature, you can check your levels again, but probably a better idea to wait for the car to cool down a bit, and then just go ahead and pour in your coolant. And that's it. What I'm saying? You should be good to go, and you will have a 100% purged out power steering system that will work for not just cars that only have power steering, but cars that have active steering, that have ARS, the whole adaptive drives bit, all that will be covered, and your car will love you for it. So in any case, there are a lot of other, really great videos that will show you kind of like the innermost details of the procedure step by step. But this video was really just made to kind of let everyone know the correct way of doing things. That's going to guarantee a better outcome for your car, and just make you a better, DIY mechanic. Because, again, it's one thing to save yourself thousands of dollars, but it's another thing when you can do it while making sure you're doing it like the absolute correct way and better than most others. And, it's something that your car is really going to love you for. So, some of your car is really going to love, and it's going to make you really happy when that thing's not breaking down on you. So that's pretty much it for this video. Thanks a lot for watching. If you have any questions or comments, as always, feel free to leave them. Otherwise, if you guys like more of this content, maybe we'll get into doing differentials and transfer case, because I've been doing all that kind of stuff on this car, all kinds of stuff on this car, guys. Just a ridiculous amount of work. But anyways, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.